The desert wind whipped across the military base as Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her flight helmet for the 100th time that morning. The year was 1991, and the Persian Gulf War had been raging for months. Every day brought new challenges, new missions, and new reminders that she was fighting two battles. One against enemy forces, and another against the skepticism of her own colleagues. Sarah had dreamed of flying combat helicopters since she was 8 years old. Watching military aircraft soar overhead during an air show with her father. While other girls her age played with dolls, she built model helicopters and memorized technical specifications. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of Apache and Cobra helicopters, and she could recite the maximum speed, range, and weapon systems of every military aircraft in service. When she announced her intention to join the military and become a combat pilot, the reactions were predictable. Her high school guidance counselor suggested she consider nursing or teaching instead. Military recruiters politely explained that combat roles were restricted to men only. Even her own family had doubts, with her mother worrying about the dangers and her father questioning whether she had the physical strength required for such demanding work. But Sarah was determined. She excelled in every academic subject, particularly mathematics and physics. She earned her private pilot's license at 17 and completed her college degree in aerospace engineering with honors. When military policies began changing to allow women in more combat support roles, she was among the first to apply for helicopter pilot training. The training was brutal. Sarah woke up every morning at 4:30, endured grueling physical conditioning, and spent countless hours studying flight manuals and tactical procedures. Her male counterparts watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some were supportive, recognizing her skill and dedication. Others made snide comments about women not belonging in combat zones, questioning whether she would panic under pressure or have the strength to handle emergency situations. Flight training pushed every student to their limits, but Sarah felt the pressure more intensely than others. She knew that any mistake, any sign of weakness, would be attributed to her gender rather than simply being human. During one particularly challenging night training exercise, her instructor deliberately created multiple equipment failures simultaneously, testing her ability to prioritize and problem-solve under extreme stress. While other students might get 1 or 2 simulated emergencies, Sarah routinely faced 3 or 4, with instructors claiming they needed to be absolutely certain she could handle anything combat might throw at her. She passed every test, excelled in every exercise, and graduated at the top of her helicopter pilot class. Her weapons training scores were exceptional. Her navigation skills were flawless, and her emergency response times were faster than most of her male colleagues. Yet when deployment assignments were handed out, Sarah found herself assigned to transport and medical evacuation duties rather than direct combat missions. The assignment stung, but Sarah approached her new role with the same dedication she brought to everything else. She flew wounded soldiers to safety, transported supplies to forward bases, and provided crucial support for ground operations. Her reputation for flying in dangerous conditions grew among the troops she served. When other pilots hesitated to attempt landings in hostile territory or severe weather, Sarah would volunteer for the mission. Her helicopter, a UH-60 Black Hawk she nicknamed Phoenix, became known throughout her unit for always completing the mission. Sarah had customized the interior for maximum efficiency during medical evacuations, memorized every landmark and safe zone in her operational area, and developed innovative techniques for landing in tight spaces under enemy fire. The ground troops began specifically requesting her for the most dangerous rescue missions, knowing that if Sarah Mitchell was flying, they had the best chance of making it home alive. Despite her proven competence, the prejudice persisted. During pre-mission briefings, commanding officers would sometimes address the room as gentlemen, before awkwardly correcting themselves. Equipment was designed for men's body sizes, requiring Sarah to use cushions and extensions to reach controls comfortably. Living quarters were segregated, leaving her isolated from the camaraderie that developed among male pilots during off-duty hours. The most frustrating moments came during tactical planning sessions, when her input was overlooked or questioned more harshly than suggestions from less experienced male pilots. Sarah had studied enemy tactics extensively and often identified weaknesses in proposed flight plans, but her recommendations were frequently dismissed until a male colleague made the same point and received credit for the insight. One evening, as Sarah performed routine maintenance on Phoenix, her crew chief, Sergeant Rodriguez, approached her with obvious concern. Rodriguez had worked with dozens of pilots over his 15-year career and recognized exceptional skill when he saw it. He had watched Sarah handle emergencies that would have overwhelmed seasoned veterans. Yet he also witnessed the daily indignities she endured. "Captain Mitchell," Rodriguez said, wiping grease from his hands, "I've been thinking about tomorrow's mission briefing. That flight path they're proposing for the supply run takes us directly over known anti-aircraft positions. I've seen you study those satellite photos for hours. What's your honest assessment?" Sarah looked up from checking the rotor blade she was inspecting. "The route is suicide, Sergeant. Those SAM sites have overlapping coverage zones. We'd be flying into a kill box with nowhere to maneuver. There's an alternate route through the mountain pass that adds 15 minutes to flight time, but keeps us below radar coverage for most of the journey." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "That's what I thought too. You should speak up during tomorrow's briefing. I tried last week during the planning session for the Northern Sector supply run. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes said my suggestions were overly cautious and questioned whether I was developing a fear of combat flying. The mission went forward as originally planned, and we lost 2 aircraft to the exact threats I had identified." The conversation was interrupted by the base commander's voice over the loudspeaker system, calling all available pilots to the command center for an emergency briefing. Sarah quickly secured her tools and headed toward the command post, wondering what new crisis had developed. The command center buzzed with activity as intelligence officers updated maps and radio operators coordinated with multiple units across the theater. Major General Thompson, the base commander, stood before a large tactical display showing terrain features and unit positions. His expression was grim as he waited for all personnel to assemble. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command, "we have a critical situation developing in Sector 7. Bravo Company, approximately 500 soldiers, has been cut off behind enemy lines following a coordinated attack on their forward operating base. Enemy forces have surrounded their position and are preventing any ground-based rescue attempts." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. 500 soldiers represented nearly an entire battalion, including many of the unit's most experienced sergeants and specialists. Losing them would be a devastating blow to ongoing operations and a tragedy beyond measure for their families back home. General Thompson continued, "Initial rescue attempts using conventional approaches have failed. The enemy has established multiple anti-aircraft positions around the perimeter, making standard helicopter insertions extremely dangerous. 3 aircraft have already been shot down attempting to reach Bravo Company's position, and we've lost contact with 2 rescue teams that tried to approach on foot." Sarah studied the tactical map, noting the positions of enemy forces and the terrain features surrounding Bravo Company's location. The soldiers were trapped in a small valley with steep mountains on 3 sides, and enemy positions controlling the only viable approach route. Traditional rescue tactics would indeed be nearly impossible under these conditions. Intelligence estimates suggest Bravo Company has enough ammunition and supplies for perhaps 36 hours of sustained defense. The general continued. After that, they'll be forced to surrender or face annihilation. Weather reports indicate a severe sandstorm system moving into the area within the next 18 hours, which will make any rescue attempts even more challenging. As the briefing continued, Sarah found herself mentally calculating flight times, fuel consumption rates, and payload requirements for a potential rescue mission. The trapped soldiers would need immediate medical attention, emergency supplies, and evacuation from their untenable position. Any successful rescue would require precise timing, innovative tactics, and exceptional flying skills. The intelligence officer stepped forward to provide additional details about enemy capabilities and the specific challenges facing any rescue attempt. Anti-aircraft guns were positioned at key choke points, shoulder-fired missiles posed threats at low altitude, and the surrounding terrain offered little cover for approaching aircraft. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with high winds and reduced visibility already affecting flight operations. Colonel Barnes, the senior pilot present, spoke up first. "Sir, with respect, this mission appears to be beyond our current capabilities. The risks to additional aircraft and crews may not justify the attempt. Perhaps we should wait for improved weather conditions or additional resources." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as other pilots nodded. The mission did seem nearly impossible, given the tactical situation and environmental challenges. Sarah felt her heart racing as she considered the 500 soldiers counting on them for salvation, knowing that each passing hour reduced their chances of survival. General Thompson's expression hardened. "Colonel Barnes, I understand your concerns about the tactical challenges, but we cannot abandon 500 American soldiers without exhausting every possible option. I need creative solutions, not defeatism." The room fell silent again as everyone grappled with the seemingly impossible task ahead. Sarah found herself stepping forward before she could second-guess the decision. "Sir, I believe there may be an approach that could work," she said, her voice steady despite the dozens of eyes now focused on her. "The conventional wisdom assumes we need to fly through the enemy positions. But what if we went over them instead?" General Thompson raised an eyebrow, intrigued, despite the skepticism visible on several faces around the room. Sarah moved to the tactical display, pointing to the mountain ranges surrounding the trapped soldiers. "Sir, the enemy has positioned their anti-aircraft defenses, expecting conventional approach routes at standard flight altitudes. They've created overlapping fields of fire between 3,000 and 8,000 feet, which covers the normal operational envelope for our helicopters." Colonel Barnes interrupted with obvious irritation. "Captain, those mountains rise to over 12,000 feet. Our helicopters aren't designed for high-altitude operations in combat conditions. The air density at that altitude would severely compromise performance, and we'd be flying well beyond recommended operational parameters." Sarah had anticipated this objection and continued confidently. "Yes, sir. It would be challenging, but not impossible. I've run the calculations based on current atmospheric conditions, aircraft specifications, and payload requirements. By stripping non-essential equipment, reducing fuel loads, and timing the approach during optimal wind conditions, we could achieve sufficient altitude to clear the mountains and approach the valley from an unexpected direction." She traced a route on the map that skirted the eastern mountain range. Climbed to 13,000 feet, then descended rapidly into the valley from the south. An approach that would bypass all known enemy positions. The enemy hasn't positioned defenses on this side because they assumed the terrain makes it inaccessible. We'd have perhaps a 15-minute window before they could reposition to counter this approach. Major Williams, an experienced Apache pilot, shook his head doubtfully. "Even if you could get over the mountains, Captain, the descent into that valley would be nearly vertical. The rotor wash alone could cause catastrophic control problems at that angle of attack. And how would you get 500 soldiers out using that same route? It would take dozens of trips, and after the first one, the enemy would know exactly where to expect us." Sarah had been hoping someone would ask that question. "We wouldn't extract them the same way we went in, sir. Have C1R with road. Tram. 1. The initial mission wouldn't be extraction. It would be to establish a secure landing zone and provide the trapped soldiers with the equipment they need to defend their position until weather conditions improve." She pulled out a detailed manifest she had prepared during the briefing. One helicopter carrying specialized equipment could provide Bravo Company with advanced communications gear, additional ammunition, medical supplies, and, most importantly, portable surface-to-air missiles. Once they have the ability to engage enemy aircraft and coordinate with our forces, we can establish air superiority over the area and conduct conventional rescue operations. The room buzzed with discussion as pilots and intelligence officers considered the unconventional approach. The plan was certainly risky, but it offered something that conventional tactics lacked: the element of surprise and a realistic path to success. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes remained skeptical. Captain Mitchell, you're proposing to fly a single helicopter through conditions that would challenge the most experienced mountain rescue pilots, carrying a payload that will push the aircraft beyond normal performance limits, into a combat zone where a single mistake would result in the loss of aircraft, crew, and any hope of rescuing those soldiers. The margin for error is essentially zero. Yes, sir, Sarah replied without hesitation. But the alternative is to watch 500 American soldiers die because we were afraid to attempt a difficult mission. I believe this approach gives us the best chance of success, and I volunteer to pilot the mission. General Thompson studied the map intently, weighing the risks against the potential to save hundreds of lives. What about crew requirements, Captain? This mission would require exceptional skill from every person aboard the aircraft. Sarah had already considered this crucial factor. Sir, I would recommend a minimal crew to reduce weight and complexity. Myself as pilot, Sergeant Rodriguez as crew chief and gunner, and Corpsman Hayes for medical support. All three of us have extensive experience working together, and Sergeant Rodriguez has mountain flying experience from his previous assignment in Afghanistan. The discussion continued for another hour, as intelligence officers provided additional details about enemy capabilities. Meteorologists updated weather predictions, and logistics personnel calculated fuel and equipment requirements. Every aspect of the proposed mission was examined and debated, with Sarah answering technical questions and addressing concerns raised by senior officers. Colonel Barnes made one final attempt to discourage the mission. General Thompson, I must formally object to this plan. Captain Mitchell may be a competent pilot under normal circumstances, but this mission requires capabilities beyond her experience level. The physical demands alone would be extraordinary, and the margin for error makes it unsuitable for any but our most seasoned combat veterans. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anger and determination that had fueled her throughout her military career. Every achievement had been questioned, every success attributed to luck rather than skill. But 500 lives hung in the balance, and personal grievances seemed insignificant compared to that reality. Colonel Barnes, Sarah replied calmly, I have over 800 hours of combat flight time, including 43 missions into hostile territory. My emergency response record is documented. My technical scores are a matter of record, and every soldier I've been sent to rescue has returned home alive. If you have concerns about my qualifications, perhaps you'd prefer to pilot this mission yourself? The challenge was clear, and everyone in the room knew that Barnes had never volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, preferring to coordinate from safer positions while pilots like Sarah flew into harm's way. His face reddened, but he couldn't refute her record or volunteer for a mission he had just declared too dangerous. General Thompson raised his hand for silence. Enough debate. Captain Mitchell, I'm authorizing you to proceed with mission planning. You have 6 hours to finalize your approach, conduct equipment checks, and brief your crew. If weather conditions deteriorate beyond acceptable parameters, the mission is scrubbed. If you encounter any technical problems during pre-flight preparations, the mission is scrubbed. But if conditions allow, you are cleared to attempt the rescue. As the room began to empty, Sarah felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror. She had convinced command to approve the most dangerous mission of her career, and now she had to prove that her confidence was justified. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Not just for her own crew, but for the 500 soldiers counting on them for salvation. Sergeant Rodriguez approached her as they left the command center. Captain, I heard my name mentioned during that briefing. I'm assuming you volunteered me for another one of your impossible missions? Sarah smiled grimly. Sergeant, how do you feel about a scenic tour of some very tall mountains, followed by a brief stop in a valley full of people who want to kill us? Rodriguez chuckled. Sounds like a typical Tuesday working with you, ma'am. What do you need me to do? Strip Phoenix down to bare essentials, remove every piece of non-critical equipment, reduce ammunition loads to minimum defensive requirements, and calculate our maximum possible climb rate at gross weight. I need to know exactly how much altitude we can achieve and how quickly we can gain it. And the cargo manifest? Sarah handed him the detailed list she had prepared. Communications, equipment, medical supplies, ammunition resupply for 500 soldiers, and 4 Stinger missile systems with 12 missiles. The Stingers are the key to the whole plan. Once Bravo Company can defend against enemy helicopters, they can hold their position until conventional rescue becomes possible. Rodriguez studied the list, whistling softly at the complexity. This is going to push Phoenix right to her limits, Captain. Maybe beyond them. I know, Sergeant. But those soldiers don't have any other options. And neither do we. As they worked through the night preparing equipment and conducting system checks, word of the mission spread throughout the base. Pilots stopped by to offer advice, share information about mountain flying techniques, and express their support. Even some who had previously questioned Sarah's abilities acknowledged the courage required to attempt such a dangerous rescue. Corpsman Hayes arrived at the helicopter pad as dawn approached, carrying his medical kit and additional supplies for the trapped soldiers. Hayes was a veteran medic who had flown dozens of missions with Sarah, and she trusted his skills completely. Captain, I've prepped trauma supplies for multiple casualties, but if the situation is as bad as intelligence suggests, we may need to make some difficult triage decisions. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Our priority is getting them the tools they need to defend themselves. Hayes, medical support is secondary to establishing their ability to hold out until reinforcements arrive. The final hour before departure was spent conducting exhaustive pre-flight checks and reviewing emergency procedures. Every system was tested multiple times. Alternate plans were discussed for various contingencies, and communication protocols were established with command and control elements. Sarah reviewed weather reports showing the approaching sandstorm that would make the mission even more challenging. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant orange and red, Sarah climbed into Phoenix's pilot seat for what could be her final mission. The helicopter had been stripped of everything except essential equipment, loaded with supplies for the trapped soldiers, and fueled to the precise amount needed for the journey. Rodriguez completed his final walk-around inspection and gave her a thumbs up from the ground crew position. Hayes secured the medical supplies and checked communication equipment one last time. All around the flight line, other personnel stopped their activities to watch as Phoenix prepared for takeoff. General Thompson arrived just before departure, approaching the aircraft with obvious concern. Captain Mitchell, I want you to understand that if conditions become too dangerous, you have my authorization to abort the mission. Those soldiers need rescue. But sacrificing your crew won't help anyone. Understood, sir, Sarah replied. But respectfully, those soldiers deserve every chance we can give them. They've been fighting for their lives all night, and they're counting on us. The general nodded, recognizing the determination in her voice. Good luck, Captain. Bring everyone home. As Phoenix lifted off from the base, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied every combat mission. But this flight was different. The stakes were higher, the technical challenges greater, and the margin for error smaller than anything she had ever attempted. The first hour of flight was routine, following established routes through areas under friendly control. Sarah used this time to monitor aircraft performance, check weather conditions, and communicate with intelligence sources about enemy activity along their planned route. Phoenix responded normally to all control inputs, and engine parameters remained within acceptable ranges despite the heavy load. As they approached the mountain range marking the beginning of hostile territory, Sarah began the gradual climb that would take them to 13,000 feet. The air grew thinner with each 1,000 feet of altitude gained, requiring more power from the engines and more precise control inputs to maintain stable flight. Crew check, Sarah announced over the intercom. Rodriguez, how are our engine temperatures looking? Still within normal range, Captain, but we're approaching the yellow zone on turbine inlet temperature. We're working these engines harder than they were designed for. Hayes, any problems with the cargo or equipment? Everything's secure back here, Captain. The Stinger missiles are properly mounted, and all communication gear is functioning normally. At 11,000 feet, Sarah noticed the first signs that Phoenix was approaching her performance limits. Control responses became sluggish, and the rate of climb decreased noticeably. The helicopter was still flying safely, but the margin for maneuvering had narrowed considerably. Rodriguez, I need you to monitor every engine parameter very closely. If anything starts moving toward the red zone, I need immediate notification. Roger that, Captain. We're in uncharted territory here, but everything still looks manageable. As they reached 12,000 feet, the peaks ahead loomed larger, requiring even more altitude to safely clear them. Sarah pushed Phoenix harder, knowing that they were approaching the point of no return. Once they crossed into hostile territory at this altitude, retreat would be difficult, if not impossible. At 13,200 feet, Phoenix finally cleared the highest peaks, and the valley containing Bravo Company's position came into view below. Sarah could see smoke rising from several locations, evidence of the ongoing battle that had raged throughout the night. Enemy positions were visible as small clusters of vehicles and equipment arranged in a rough circle around the trapped American forces. Target acquired, Sarah announced calmly, though her heart was racing. Beginning descent phase. Rodriguez, prepare for rapid altitude loss and possible enemy contact. The descent was the most dangerous part of the mission. Sarah had to lose over 8,000 feet of altitude in less than 5 minutes while maintaining control of an aircraft that was already operating at the edge of its performance envelope. Too steep an angle would create uncontrollable rotor vibrations, while too gradual a descent would expose them to enemy fire for an extended period. As Phoenix dove toward the valley floor, enemy forces below began to react. Radio chatter increased dramatically as confused voices tried to understand where the American helicopter had come from. Anti-aircraft guns that had been pointed toward the traditional approach routes swung frantically to track the unexpected threat from above. Incoming fire, Rodriguez called out as tracer rounds streaked past the aircraft. Multiple positions engaging from the northwest perimeter. Sarah banked sharply to the right, using terrain features to mask their approach while maintaining her descent rate. Phoenix shuddered under the combination of high descent speed and evasive maneuvering, but the aircraft held together as they dropped below the effective range of the larger anti-aircraft guns. At 3,000 feet, Sarah could clearly see Bravo Company's defensive perimeter. The soldiers had constructed improvised fortifications using destroyed vehicles and natural terrain features, but their position was clearly untenable for extended defense. Several buildings showed damage from rocket and mortar attacks, and medical personnel could be seen treating wounded soldiers in what little cover was available. Hayes, prepare for hot landing, Sarah ordered as they descended through 2,000 feet. We'll have maybe 60 seconds on the ground before enemy forces adjust to our position. Roger, Captain. Medical supplies and Stinger missiles ready for immediate deployment. Enemy fire intensified as Phoenix approached the landing zone, with small arms fire crackling around the aircraft and rocket-propelled grenades detonating dangerously close. Sarah's training and experience took over as she executed a combat landing that brought the helicopter down hard but safely within Bravo Company's perimeter. Immediately, American soldiers rushed toward the aircraft, providing covering fire while Hayes and Rodriguez rapidly unloaded critical supplies. The Stinger missile systems were the highest priority, followed by communications equipment that would allow the trapped forces to coordinate with external support. Captain Johnson, Bravo Company's commanding officer, reached the helicopter first. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, evidence of the fierce fighting that had continued throughout the night. Thank God you made it through. We've been cut off for 18 hours, and we're down to our last ammunition reserves. Sarah remained at the controls, engines running and ready for immediate departure. Captain Johnson, we've brought you 4 Stinger systems with 12 missiles, enough ammunition for sustained defense, and communication gear that will link you directly to command. Can your soldiers operate the Stingers? We have 3 men qualified on those systems, Johnson replied as his soldiers carried the precious cargo to defensive positions. How long until reinforcements arrive? Weather conditions should improve within 8 hours, Sarah answered. Once you have air defense capability, We can establish helicopter corridors for evacuation and resupply. You need to hold out until then. Once. End quote. Enemy mortar rounds began falling closer to their position as hostile forces adjusted their fire to target the landed helicopter. Rodriguez had completed unloading operations and was preparing to secure the cargo area for departure. Captain Mitchell, Johnson said urgently, we have 14 seriously wounded soldiers who won't survive another 8 hours without immediate medical attention. Is there any possibility of evacuation? Sarah's heart sank as she considered the tactical situation. Phoenix had barely made it over the mountains with a full load of equipment, and returning with wounded soldiers would require even more demanding performance from an aircraft already pushed beyond its limits. But looking at Johnson's desperate expression and thinking about 14 young soldiers whose lives hung in the balance, she knew she couldn't abandon them. How many can walk with assistance? She asked quickly. Maybe 8 of them. With help from other soldiers. Load the 6 most critical cases now. Rodriguez. Calculate weight and balance. For 6 passengers, plus medical equipment. Rodriguez's voice was tense over the intercom. Captain, we're already at maximum gross weight. Adding 6 more people could put us beyond safe flying parameters. Enemy fire was increasing in intensity as hostile forces moved to surround the landing zone. Mortar rounds were falling in a tightening pattern around Phoenix, and small arms fire was becoming more accurate as shooters found better positions. We'll dump fuel to reduce weight, Sarah decided. Hayes, prep those 6 casualties for immediate evacuation. Rodriguez, drain fuel tanks to minimum reserves for the return flight. As her crew worked frantically to prepare for departure, Sarah maintained communication with command headquarters, updating them on the tactical situation and requesting immediate air support for Bravo Company's new defensive capabilities. Command, this is Phoenix. Package delivered successfully. Bravo Company now has air defense systems operational and improved communications. Requesting immediate air support to suppress enemy positions around the perimeter. Phoenix, this is Command. Air support is inbound. Estimated arrival in 45 minutes. What is your current status? Command, we are attempting medical evacuation of critical casualties. We'll depart the landing zone within 2 minutes. The 6 wounded soldiers were loaded aboard with help from their comrades, each man a testament to the courage and sacrifice of American forces. Some were unconscious from blood loss. Others fought to stay alert despite severe injuries. Hayes worked quickly to stabilize them for the flight, while Rodriguez completed final preparations for departure. Enemy forces were now close enough to engage Phoenix with direct fire weapons, and bullet holes appeared in the aircraft's fuselage as Sarah increased engine power for takeoff. The helicopter struggled to lift off under the excessive weight, rising slowly while taking hits from multiple directions. Phoenix is taking fire, Rodriguez reported, as more rounds struck the aircraft. We have damage to the tail section and possible hydraulic leaks. Sarah fought to maintain control as Phoenix climbed laboriously away from the landing zone. The helicopter's performance was severely compromised by battle damage and excessive weight, making the return flight even more challenging than the approach had been. At 500 feet above ground level, Phoenix cleared the immediate threat from small arms fire, but the long climb back to altitude necessary for crossing the mountains lay ahead. Engine temperatures were already approaching critical levels, and the damaged hydraulic systems were making control inputs increasingly difficult. Rodriguez, give me honest assessment of aircraft condition, Sarah ordered, as they began the climb toward the mountain passes. Captain, we have multiple hydraulic leaks, possible engine damage, and structural damage to the tail boom. We're flying on backup systems, and I'm not sure how long they'll hold out. One of the wounded soldiers, a young sergeant named Davis, regained consciousness and looked around in confusion. Hayes immediately moved to reassure him while continuing to treat his injuries. Sir, you're aboard a medical evacuation helicopter, Hayes explained gently. We're taking you to safety. Davis tried to speak but was too weak from blood loss. Hayes checked his vital signs and administered additional medication to stabilize him for the flight. Around them, The other 5 wounded soldiers lay unconscious or semi-conscious, their lives dependent on reaching medical facilities quickly. As Phoenix struggled to gain altitude for the mountain crossing, Sarah realized that they might not have sufficient power to clear the peaks with the current weight and damage. The aircraft was flying at maximum power settings, but the rate of climb was decreasing with each 100 feet gained. "Hayes," she called over the intercom, "I need you to be honest about triage priorities. We may have to make some very difficult decisions." Hayes understood immediately what she was asking. If Phoenix couldn't clear the mountains with all 6 patients aboard, they might have to choose between saving some lives or losing everyone. It was the kind of decision that would haunt them forever, but it might be necessary. "Captain, give me another 5 minutes to work on stabilizing them," Hayes replied. "Sergeant Davis is the most critical, but he might survive the flight if we can control his bleeding." At 8,000 feet, Phoenix's engines began showing signs of serious distress. Temperatures exceeded normal operating ranges, and unusual vibrations suggested possible internal damage from the sustained high-power operation. Sarah knew they were approaching the point where engine failure became likely. "Rodriguez, prepare for emergency landing procedures," she ordered reluctantly. "We may not be able to maintain power much longer." But then, from the radio, came a voice that changed everything. "Phoenix, this is Raptor Flight with 4 F-16 seconds. We have enemy positions in sight and are beginning attack runs. Hold your position for air support." Through the aircraft windows, Sarah could see American fighter jets diving toward enemy positions around Bravo Company's location. Explosions erupted across the valley floor as precision-guided weapons destroyed anti-aircraft positions and enemy strong points. "Phoenix, this is command. Enemy air defenses in your operational area have been neutralized. You are cleared for direct route to base medical facilities. Emergency medical teams standing by." The news meant Phoenix could take a shorter, lower-altitude route that would be much easier on the damaged aircraft and wounded passengers. Instead of climbing to 13,000 feet to cross the mountains, they could fly through lower passes that required only 9,000 feet of altitude. "Roger, command. Phoenix is adjusting course for direct route. Estimated arrival at base medical facilities in 90 minutes. The relief was enormous. But Sarah remained focused on flying the damaged helicopter safely home. Engine parameters were still in the danger zone. Hydraulic systems continued to leak fluid, and the wounded soldiers needed immediate medical attention upon landing. As they approached friendly territory, Hayes reported that all 6 patients were still alive, though several remained in critical condition. The flight had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. Not only had they delivered crucial supplies to 500 trapped soldiers, but they had also saved 6 lives that would have been lost without immediate evacuation. Phoenix limped into base airspace 90 minutes later, with emergency vehicles standing by on the flight line. Medical teams rushed to the aircraft as soon as it touched down, immediately beginning advanced trauma treatment for the wounded soldiers. As Sarah shut down the engines and completed post-flight procedures, she reflected on the mission's significance. They had proven that innovative thinking could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, that courage and skill could triumph over conventional wisdom, and most importantly, that every life was worth risking everything to save. General Thompson approached the aircraft as medical teams worked to transfer the wounded soldiers to waiting ambulances. "Captain Mitchell, I've received preliminary reports from Bravo Company. The equipment you delivered has completely changed their tactical situation. They've already engaged and destroyed 2 enemy helicopters using the Stinger missiles, and air support operations are proceeding without hindrance. What about the other soldiers, sir? Will they be evacuated safely?" "Evacuation operations begin in 2 hours, now that we have air superiority over the area. Every one of those 500 soldiers will be coming home, thanks to your mission today." As Sarah climbed out of Phoenix, she noticed Colonel Barnes approaching. She braced herself for another confrontation, but his expression was different now. Respectful, rather than dismissive. "Captain Mitchell," Barnes said formally, "I owe you an apology. Your performance today was extraordinary, and I was wrong to question your capabilities. You've proven that courage and skill matter more than any other factor in combat operations." The acknowledgement was gratifying, but Sarah's thoughts were focused on larger implications. "Sir, this mission succeeded because we were willing to think beyond conventional tactics. Maybe it's time we reconsidered other assumptions about what's possible in combat operations." Word of the rescue spread quickly throughout the military, eventually reaching the highest levels of command. Sarah's innovative approach to an impossible mission became a case study in military academies, and her name became synonymous with courage under fire. 6 months later, Sarah received orders promoting her to major and assigning her to a new position developing advanced helicopter tactics for special operations. The promotion came with a commendation that read simply, "For extraordinary heroism and innovative thinking in the successful rescue of 500 American soldiers." More importantly, all 6 wounded soldiers she had evacuated survived their injuries and eventually returned to duty. Sergeant Davis, the young soldier who had regained consciousness during the flight, wrote her a letter expressing his gratitude and describing his recovery process. The 500 soldiers of Bravo Company were evacuated safely over the following 24 hours, with no additional casualties. The equipment Sarah had delivered enabled them to defend their position until reinforcements arrived, proving that sometimes the most important contribution to a battle is giving people the tools they need to save themselves. Years later, when people asked Sarah about the mission that made her famous, she would always redirect attention to the soldiers she had served with. Rodriguez, Hayes, Captain Johnson, and especially the 500 members of Bravo Company who had fought courageously against overwhelming odds. The skeptics who claimed women couldn't handle combat helicopter operations gradually faded into history, replaced by a new generation of military leaders who judged pilots by their performance rather than their gender. Sarah's success opened doors for countless other women who dreamed of serving their country in combat roles, proving that capability and courage know no boundaries. Phoenix was eventually repaired and returned to service, going on to complete hundreds of additional missions. But for Sarah, no subsequent flight would ever match the significance of that day when she proved that impossible missions become possible when the stakes are high enough and the people attempting them refuse to accept defeat. The true measure of the mission's success wasn't found in military commendations or career advancement, but in the simple fact that 506 American soldiers came home alive because one pilot was willing to believe that there's always another way to solve an impossible problem.